What happens when two corrupt cops arrest an innocent man, leading to his brother taking actions into his own hands? This is the gripping story of a determined black man who, after years of injustice, turns the tables on those who abused their power. From a high-stake arrest to an intense fallout, watch as justice is served upon those who are supposed to protect the community. The warm afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet roadside as Damon's car rolled along the smooth pavement. The faint hum of the engine was the only sound until red and blue lights exploded in his rearview mirror. Damon glanced at the flashing lights, his jaw tightening momentarily before he took a slow, measured breath. It was time. He pulled over with deliberate care, his hands steady on the wheel as he parked just off the road. Cars occasionally sped by in the distance, but this stretch of road was mostly empty. The perfect place for someone to abuse their power, or get caught doing it. The police cruiser came to a stop behind him, and Damon adjusted his rearview mirror, catching the reflection of two officers stepping out. Officer Paul Wright walked with exaggerated authority, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon as though to send a message. His partner, Officer Daniel Moore, trailed behind, less confident but complicit in every way that mattered. Damon's heartbeat was steady as he reached toward his dashboard, pressing a subtle button under the radio to activate the hidden cameras. His car was rigged with more than just recording equipment. Every angle was covered, every word about to be preserved. Months of planning had led to this moment, and he wasn't about to falter. He needed to do this, to get justice for his brother, who was falsely arrested by these very officers. As Paul reached the driver's side window, Damon rolled it down. The hot afternoon air flooded in, carrying the faint scent of asphalt and dry grass. "Afternoon, officer," Damon said evenly, his voice calm but firm. Paul leaned in, his sunglasses reflecting Damon's face back at him. "Afternoon. You know why I stopped you?" His tone dripped with condescension, each word sharp enough to provoke. "No, sir." "Care to explain?" Damon replied, keeping his hands on the steering wheel in clear view. Paul smirked. "Broken taillight. And you were driving a little erratically. Where are you headed in such a hurry?" Damon glanced in his side mirror, catching Daniel's nervous glance. He let the question hang in the air for a moment before answering. "Just heading home. Didn't realize I had a broken taillight." Paul chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, we'll see about that. License and registration." Damon complied, his movements deliberate and calm. The stage was set. Paul's grin widened as he held Damon's license and registration. "Broken taillight and erratic driving. You've got yourself a real problem here, pal." His voice oozed arrogance, every word calculated to provoke. Damon kept his hands steady on the wheel, glancing briefly at the reflection of the officers in his side mirror. "With all due respect, officer, my taillight was working fine when I left the house. Maybe you're mistaken." Paul barked out a laugh, his partner Daniel chuckling faintly from the passenger side. Daniel leaned in close to the window, his arms crossed lazily. "Mistaken? You think we're making this up? Step out of the car," Paul ordered abruptly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Damon hesitated for a half-second, just enough to show defiance without being overt. "Is there a reason for this, officer?" "I've complied so far." Paul leaned in, his face inches from Damon's. "You're gonna step out now, or things are gonna get a lot worse for you." His hand rested near his holstered weapon in a not-so-subtle threat. Damon's gaze flickered between the two officers, his jaw tightening slightly. He unclipped his seatbelt and opened the door, stepping out with deliberate care. The sunlight hit him full on as he straightened, his hands held clearly at his sides. "Good boy," Paul muttered under his breath as he jerked his head toward the hood of the car. "Hands where I can see 'em. Let's keep this simple." Damon walked to the front of the car, placing his hands flat on the hot metal of the hood. His reflection stared back at him in the windshield as Paul circled like a vulture. Daniel, meanwhile, sauntered around to the passenger side, opening the door without asking. "What are you doing?" Damon called back, his voice calm but carrying just enough edge to challenge. Paul turned sharply, stepping close again. You don't get to ask questions, pal. You keep your mouth shut, or we'll take you downtown. Understand? From behind, Daniel grinned as he began rifling through the glove compartment, papers fluttering to the ground. What do we have here? You travel light, huh? Damon remained silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Every rustle, every insult, every careless action was being captured. And Paul and Daniel didn't have a clue. You nervous or something? Paul asked, his voice taunting. Most people don't just sit there quiet like you're doing. Makes me wonder. Damon tilted his head slightly, his voice even. Wonder about what, officer? Paul stepped closer, his shadow falling over Damon. What you're hiding. You people always think you're smarter than us, always running scams, always up to something, and we always catch you. Damon's hands twitched against the hood for the briefest moment, but his face gave nothing away. You have a lot of opinions for someone who just pulled me over for a broken taillight. Paul's lip curled, and his voice dropped low. You think this is funny? We'll see who's laughing when we're done. Meanwhile, Daniel pulled something from under the passenger seat. A small bag Damon had planted earlier. Harmless, but meant to test the officer's integrity. Bingo! Daniel called out triumphantly, holding it up. What's this? Paul turned, his expression lighting up like a spark. He grabbed the bag from Daniel and held it in Damon's face. Well, well, well. Look what we found. Care to explain this? Damon turned his head, his expression unreadable. I don't know what that is. Oh, sure you don't, Paul sneered, shaking the bag. It's funny how you all say the same thing. Not mine. Don't know where it came from. But we've been doing this a long time, and we know a liar when we see one. Daniel laughed from the side, pacing slowly around the car. Classic. You'll deny it all the way to booking, and the evidence will still stick. Paul turned back to Damon, the bag still in his hand. See? Here's the problem with guys like you. You think you're untouchable, think the system works for you. But we're the system. We decide what happens out here. And guess what? Nobody's coming to help you. Damon's fingers pressed faintly against the hood, his knuckles whitening for just a moment before he steadied himself. I'd be careful if I were you, officer, he said softly. Paul's face twisted into mock surprise. Careful? You threatening me now? No threat, Damon replied, his voice still calm. Just advice. Paul laughed bitterly, tossing the bag to Daniel. Run it through the system. I bet this guy's got a record already. Daniel nodded, heading back toward the cruiser. Paul stayed behind, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard. You should have kept driving, pal. Now you're gonna see what happens when you mess with the wrong people. Damon stayed silent, his gaze steady. The officers didn't realize it yet, but every second they dug deeper into their own grave. The hum of Daniel's footsteps faded as he returned to the cruiser, clutching the planted bag like a trophy. Damon's eyes tracked him briefly before shifting back to Paul, who stood uncomfortably close, his smug grin stretching wider by the second. You should have just played along, kid, Paul said, tapping his finger on Damon's shoulder as if scolding him. Could have been easy. Damon tensed slightly, but didn't react. I didn't realize cooperating meant having my rights violated. Paul let out a short laugh, cold and humorless. Rights? That's cute. You think you're on some courtroom TV show? You don't get to pull that lawyer talk with me. From behind, Daniel's voice cut through the air as he leaned into the cruiser's radio. Running his name now, Paul. We'll see what pops up. Damon turned his head slightly toward the sound, letting the moment stretch before speaking. You're wasting your time. Paul grabbed Damon's shoulder roughly, forcing him to face forward again. Don't turn your head unless I tell you to. You seem tense, Damon replied evenly, ignoring the sting of Paul's grip. Something bothering you? Paul's jaw tightened as his smirk faltered for half a second, his authority feeling tested. What bothers me is guys like you who think they're smarter than us. You act calm, but you're shaking inside, aren't you? Damon didn't answer. Paul took a step back, circling to the trunk of the car, where Daniel had tossed Damon's belongings. Paul bent down, rifling through the mess, shoving items around with deliberate carelessness. A water bottle rolled off the pile and onto the asphalt. Nice ride you got here, Paul muttered. Bit flashy, don't you think? Damon tilted his head slightly. I work hard for what I have, officer. Hard work, huh? Paul sneered, looking up at him. Or something else? Damon's gaze remained steady. You know, if you stopped profiling people and started asking real questions, you'd save yourself a lot of trouble. Paul stood up sharply, stepping toward Damon, his face now inches away. You want to run that mouth some more? I'll give you plenty of time to explain yourself when we haul you in. Paul, Daniel called out suddenly, his voice carrying a note of confusion. Nothing's coming up on him. Paul froze, his back stiffening. He turned slightly toward the cruiser. What? Daniel stepped out of the car, holding the radio mic loosely in one hand. Clean record. No warrants, no priors, nothing. Paul's expression soured. He turned back to Damon, eyes narrowed. I don't buy it. Maybe you're just looking for something that's not there, Damon replied calmly. Paul ignored him, gesturing at Daniel. Keep searching. This guy's hiding something. You don't drive a car like this and come up squeaky clean. Daniel shrugged and went back to rummaging through the car, now moving faster, more frustrated. Papers fluttered to the ground again, followed by the thud of Damon's gym bag hitting the asphalt. Damon's gaze flickered briefly to the scattered mess. You're really making yourselves at home in there. Paul walked back toward him, his boots grinding loudly against the gravel. You keep talking like you've got the upper hand here. He paused, leaning in close again. But let me remind you of something. There's two of us, and there's one of you. Out here, nobody cares what you have to say. Damon held his gaze, his voice dropping slightly. You sure about that? Paul stiffened. For a moment, something in Damon's tone seemed to rattle him, but he pushed it aside, pointing a finger at him. Keep it up, smartass. I'm about done with this little act of yours. Behind him, Daniel's voice rang out again, more agitated this time. Paul, there's nothing here. I've checked every inch. The bag's empty, the glove box is clean. Guy's got nothing. Paul's irritation boiled over as he turned back toward the car. Then keep looking. Did I stutter? Daniel hesitated. We've got enough for the bag we found earlier. Paul's voice turned sharp. I said, keep looking. Damon's calm facade remained intact, but his eyes were sharp, studying the growing tension between the officers. Paul's anger was rising, and Daniel, while loyal, was starting to show cracks, second-guessing orders, hesitating under the afternoon sun. Damon had seen this dynamic before, a leader overplaying his hand and dragging his partner down with him. Paul turned back to Damon, seething now, his authority clearly slipping. This doesn't end here. You know that, right? Damon allowed himself the faintest smile. You're right, it doesn't. Paul opened his mouth to retort when a distant sound broke the rhythm, the faint chirp of a phone. Damon tilted his head just enough to glance toward his trunk. The sound came again, distinct and deliberate. Paul's eyes darted toward the source. What's that? Damon didn't respond, letting the question hang in the air. The officers glanced at each other now, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Daniel spoke up. Paul, maybe we should? Shut it! Paul snapped, his voice sharp and clipped. He looked at Damon, suspicion clouding his face. What are you pulling here? Damon didn't answer. The chirp stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving only the sound of passing cars in the distance. Damon remained perfectly still, his hands on the hood, his face calm. The officers stared at him, the tension crackling like static electricity. Paul's hand hovered near his belt, his breathing louder now, more deliberate. Whatever control he'd had earlier was slipping fast. Damon watched them silently, knowing they were spiraling, digging themselves deeper with every move, and this was only the beginning. The oppressive heat pressed down as Paul's glare burned into Damon, who remained motionless, his hands still resting on the hood of the car. Paul tossed the phone back into the trunk with a sneer, his frustration simmering as Daniel slammed the passenger door shut. "Turn around!" Paul barked, stepping closer. Damon didn't move immediately. "Why?" he asked, his voice even but unflinching. Paul's hand shot out, gripping Damon's shoulder and yanking him roughly toward him. "Because I told you to!" His voice was low and dangerous, inches from Damon's face. Daniel stood just behind Paul, his stance casual, but his smirk betraying a sadistic enjoyment of the scene. Man, you should know better. He doesn't like to repeat himself. Damon staggered slightly from the force, but kept his expression neutral, his body language controlled. Am I under arrest? Paul pushed him hard against the hood, pressing one forearm into Damon's back as he leaned in close. You think you're funny? You're lucky we haven't hauled your ass in already. Resisting is just gonna make it worse. I haven't resisted anything, Damon replied, his voice muffled slightly by the hood's heat beneath him. Not yet, Paul spat. But you're sure testing my patience. Daniel moved to Damon's side, crossing his arms and tilting his head as he looked down at him. You've got quite the mouth on you. That's the problem with guys like you. Always think you're smarter than us. Paul straightened, grabbing Damon by the arm and pulling him upright. Damon flinched slightly but kept his footing, his gaze steady despite the clear pain in his shoulder. Spread your legs, Paul ordered. Damon hesitated, just long enough for Paul to shove him roughly again. I said, spread 'em. Damon obeyed this time, his hands gripping the hood as Paul began to pat him down aggressively, his hands lingering longer than necessary. The scene had escalated far beyond a routine stop, and Damon knew the cameras were capturing everything. Empty, Paul muttered, stepping back with a frustrated huff. Clean pockets, clean car. Nothing adds up. He turned to Daniel, his voice sharp. Maybe we're not looking hard enough. Daniel smirked and stepped closer, leaning against the car as he folded his arms. Or maybe he just hasn't told us where he's hiding it yet. Paul's eyes lit up at the suggestion. He turned back to Damon, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt and pulling him inches away from the hood. You hiding something on you? Or do we need to check somewhere more personal? Damon's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his voice steady. There's nothing to find because I haven't done anything. Paul laughed, the sound harsh and grating. That's not how this works. You don't get to say what's true. We do. Before Damon could respond, Paul shoved him back against the car, his body hitting the hood with a metallic thud. Damon's arms flailed slightly to catch himself, and his sunglasses fell from his face, skittering across the asphalt. Paul, Daniel said, a faint edge of amusement in his tone. Don't break him before we get him downtown. Paul ignored him, leaning in close to Damon's ear. You think you're untouchable, don't you? Think someone's gonna come save you out here? He pushed harder against Damon's back, his weight forcing Damon to press further against the scorching hood. Damon's voice was low but unbroken. I don't need anyone to save me. Paul pulled back slightly, sneering down at him. Big words for someone about to lose everything. You've got nothing to hide, huh? Then you won't mind if we check a little deeper. He gestured for Daniel to grab the gym bag from the trunk. Rip it apart. Daniel moved quickly, snatching the bag and unzipping it with unnecessary force. He began to toss its contents onto the ground. A pair of running shoes, a water bottle, a crumpled towel. The sound of objects hitting the asphalt was deliberate, loud. Nothing, Daniel announced as he emptied the bag. Paul's face twisted into a mask of rage. This doesn't make sense. There's something here. There's always something. He spun back toward Damon, grabbing him by the front of his shirt. You're hiding something. I know you are. Damon met his eyes, his voice sharp but calm. You've already found all there is to find. Maybe you should stop before you dig yourself in any deeper. Paul froze for a split second, his grip tightening reflexively. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face before it was masked by a scowl. You think you're smart, huh? Paul snarled, shoving Damon back against the hood one last time before stepping away. We'll see how smart you are when this goes on record. Daniel laughed from his place near the trunk, his hands on his hips. Looks like you're having a rough day, man. Damon straightened, brushing his shirt down as he turned to face them both. You have no idea. Paul stepped closer, his voice low. Keep running that mouth. It's gonna be your last mistake. The tension was thick, suffocating, but Damon remained calm. Every shove, every insult, every threat. They were all pieces of evidence, and the officers were giving him exactly what he needed. The metallic clang of the trunk slamming shut echoed down the empty roadside as Daniel dusted off his hands. He approached Paul with a confident smirk, holding the planted bag of powder like a trophy. Look what I found, Daniel said, tossing it to Paul, who caught it with ease. Paul held the bag up to the sunlight, turning it over like a prized artifact. "Well, well, well," he drawled, his grin widening. "Guess you're not as squeaky clean as you like to think, huh?" Damon stood by the hood of the car, his chest rising and falling steadily, but his voice cut through the officer's smugness. "That's not mine." Paul let out a short, mocking laugh, shaking his head. "Of course it's not. It never is, right? Same old story, same old excuses." He turned to Daniel, who was leaning casually against the cruiser. "They always say it's not theirs. Isn't that cute?" Daniel chuckled, pushing off the car and strolling closer. "Real cute," he said, glancing at Damon. "You know, you should have just stayed quiet. Would have made this easier on yourself." "I said it's not mine," Damon snapped, his voice booming now. He stepped forward, his body tense, but Paul immediately shoved him back, forcing him to stumble into the hot hood. "Watch it!" Paul barked, jabbing a finger in Damon's face. "You don't get to make demands here. You don't get to yell. You're lucky we're not cuffing you right now." Damon gritted his teeth, his hands gripping the edge of the hood to steady himself. His anger flared, but he forced himself to remain in control. Paul stepped closer, holding the bag just inches from Damon's face. "So, if this isn't yours, then whose is it? Did it just fall out of the sky?" Damon glared back at him, his voice low and sharp. "You planted it, and you know it." Paul smirked, unbothered by the accusation. He tossed the bag back to Daniel, who caught it with a laugh. "Planted it? Sure. Whatever you say, tough guy." Daniel chimed in, his tone mocking. "Yeah, let's see how that works out for you." "Oh, Your Honor, the cops framed me." He laughed loudly, as if the very idea was absurd. Paul's voice turned deadly calm, his grin widening. "Here's the thing. Nobody cares what you say. All they're gonna see is this bag, your face, and our report. That's the only story they'll need." Damon straightened, his voice rising again, sharp and defiant. "You're lying, and you know it. You think you're untouchable because of that badge, but you're nothing but criminals." Daniel's smirk faltered slightly, but Paul's confidence never wavered. He leaned in close, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you're smart, don't you? You think you're gonna talk your way out of this? Out here, I'm the law. What I say goes. You don't have rights. You have what I give you." Paul grabbed Damon's shoulder roughly, spinning him around and forcing him to lean harder against the hood. "Now you listen to me," Paul hissed, his tone low and menacing. "You keep running that mouth, and I'll give you something to yell about. You think anyone's coming to save you? You think anyone cares?" Damon's voice was steady, unshaken even as Paul pressed him into the hood. "You should be careful, officer." Paul froze for a second, his grip tightening. Then he laughed again, louder this time, as if the very idea was absurd. "Careful? You don't get to tell me what to do. You're in my world now, boy." Daniel sauntered over, tossing the bag into the open window of the cruiser with a lazy flick. "Looks like he's all talk, Paul. Let's just take him in and get this over with." Paul turned back to Damon, grabbing him by the front of his shirt and pulling him upright again. "You think this ends here? It doesn't. You're mine now. You're going to jail, and no one's going to believe a word you say." Damon glared at him, his voice cold and deliberate. "You don't even realize what you've done, do you?" Paul snorted, shoving Damon back against the car one more time. "The only thing I've done is my job." Daniel laughed from behind him. "You're just mad we caught you. Go ahead, keep yelling. It's not going to change anything." Paul leaned closer to Damon, his grin widening. "This is how it ends for you. Get used to it." Damon said nothing, his face unreadable. But inside, he knew the officers had just sealed their fate. They were too cocky to realize it. But every shove, every insult, every planted piece of evidence was being captured. And Damon would make sure they paid for it. The tension simmered as Paul gestured toward the cruiser. "Cuff him. We're done here." Daniel stepped forward, reaching for Damon's wrists. But before the cuffs clicked shut, Damon's voice rang out, calm and sharp. "You're going to regret this." Paul laughed bitterly. "The only regret I have is not dragging you in sooner." As the cuffs tightened around Damon's wrists, His resolve hardened. The officers thought they were untouchable, but Damon knew the truth. The hum of the police cruiser's engine filled the silence as it cruised down the empty road. Damon sat stiffly in the back seat, the tight metal cuffs biting into his wrists. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting sharp streaks of light across his face. He barely felt the heat. His mind was elsewhere. His brother's face flashed through his memory. Marcus, sitting in that courtroom 2 years ago, shackled and silent, while Paul Wright smirked on the witness stand, his lies spilling effortlessly. Damon could still hear the judge's gavel, the finality of it like a slap across the face. Marcus had screamed his innocence until his voice broke, but no one listened. Paul and Daniel had planted something on him, too. Damon never forgot the smugness in their eyes as they walked out of the courthouse that day. "Clean work," he had overheard one of them say as they laughed on their way to the parking lot. Clean work. Those 2 words replayed in Damon's head like a curse ever since. Now, here he was. Same officers, same arrogance, same tricks. But today was different. Damon turned his gaze toward the window, his breathing steady despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. The weight of his phone, the silent transmitter in his jacket, was a constant reminder that every insult, every shove, every smug word was being recorded and sent to his friend. The footage was already uploading, secure and ready for the world to see. This wasn't just for him. This was for Marcus, for the 2 years his brother had spent behind bars, for the job he had lost, for the life that had been ripped away because of men like these. Damon would make sure they never did this to anyone else again. Paul's voice shattered the quiet, laced with its usual smugness. "You're awful quiet back there. Makes me think you're starting to realize how bad you screwed up." Damon didn't answer, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Paul's smirk reflected back at him, his arrogance plain as day. "Or maybe," Daniel chimed in, turning slightly in his seat, "he's rehearsing his excuses. They always come up with some sad little story once we get to booking." Damon's fists curled behind his back, the cuffs digging into his skin. He thought of Marcus again, how defeated his brother had looked when the verdict was read. That wouldn't happen to him. Not this time. "You'll have plenty of time to cry it out later," Paul continued, his fingers tapping idly on the steering wheel. "I hope you're good at making friends." Damon's voice cut through the air, low but steady. "You planted that bag," Paul snorted, turning his head just enough to smirk at Damon. "Planted it? Is that what we're going with now? You think anyone's going to believe that?" Damon tilted his head, the faintest edge of a smile tugging at his lips. "It's the truth." Daniel laughed sharply, twisting to look at him. "The truth? Man, you've got a real imagination. Maybe you can sell that story when they put you in front of the judge." Damon stared out the window again, ignoring their jeers. His mind was racing. The footage was being sent as they spoke, captured from every angle of his car. He could already imagine the moment it went live. The comments flooding in, the anger spreading across the internet. People would see the truth. They had to see it. But when should he reveal it to these 2? If he told them now, would they panic and try to destroy evidence? Or worse, would they lash out? He thought of Marcus again, of his brother's broken voice as he called home the first time from prison. Damon couldn't let them do that to someone else. Timing was everything. "You know," Paul drawled, his voice snapping Damon back to the present, "I almost feel bad for you. It's always the same. Think you're smarter than us, then boom." He clapped his hands together for emphasis. "We take you down, and no one even remembers your name." Damon's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm, sharper now. "What about Marcus Taylor? Do you remember his name?" The question landed like a punch to the gut. For a split second, the cruiser went silent. Daniel glanced at Paul uncertainly, but Paul recovered quickly, his smirk returning. "Doesn't ring a bell," Paul said casually, though Damon caught the flicker of annoyance in his voice. "You all look the same to me." Damon turned his gaze to the rearview mirror, his voice dropping like a blade. "You remember him. You put him away, lied to a judge's face, and smiled while you did it." Paul's fingers gripped the wheel tighter. his knuckles white, but his voice remained cocky. "Careful what you say back there. I wouldn't want to add defamation to your charges." Damon leaned back, his breathing steady again. "You'll remember his name soon enough," Paul snorted, dismissing the comment with a wave of his hand. Big talk for someone in cuffs. The police station appeared on the horizon now, its gray silhouette looming closer with every passing second. Damon felt his heartbeat quicken as he shifted slightly, the cuffs rattling faintly. Not yet. He could feel the moment approaching, the perfect time to drop the hammer. Until then, he would let Paul and Daniel think they had won. Let them smirk. Let them laugh. Because soon the world would see them for what they really were. The holding cell was small and stifling, with the dull clang of the door echoing through the nearly empty room as it locked behind Damon. The sound lingered in his ears, but he barely registered it. The air was thick with the smell of old sweat and metal, a suffocating reminder of where he was. Damon sat on the edge of the narrow bench, his wrists aching from the cuffs that had finally been removed. His hands rested loosely on his knees, his body still and composed despite the chaos swirling around him. He glanced up briefly through the bars, where Paul stood just outside, his smug grin firmly in place. Daniel leaned against the far wall, hands in his pockets, watching with that same lazy smirk. Paul's voice rang through the cell, loud and condescending. "You get comfy in there. Looks good on you." Damon didn't respond, his gaze dropping back to the scuffed concrete floor. "I told you this was how it ends," Paul continued, stepping closer to the bars. "You think you're smart? You think your little attitude was gonna save you? Newsflash. You're done. You hear me? Done." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Still quiet. Must be sinking in now, huh? The tough guy acts all worn out." Damon exhaled slowly through his nose, steadying himself. He thought about Marcus, his brother, sitting in this very station 2 years ago, wearing the same cuffs, hearing the same taunts from these same men. He could still see Marcus's eyes, red, defeated, and empty, when Damon visited him after the verdict. Damon had sworn to himself that day that he would make things right. He lifted his head slowly now, meeting Paul's glare with deliberate calm. "You really think you've won?" Paul's smirk faltered for just a second, replaced with irritation. "What was that?" Damon leaned forward slightly, his voice calm and measured, each word carrying weight. "I said, you haven't won anything." Paul scoffed, though the confidence in his voice sounded strained. "You're locked up in a cell, genius. I'd say that's a win for me." Damon's lips curled into a faint smile, his first since the stop. "It's funny you say that." Daniel shifted, his smirk thinning as he frowned slightly. "What's funny?" Damon tilted his head, his voice cool and steady. "The fact that you think you're in control. You're not. You haven't been all day." Paul stepped closer, his fists clenching at his sides. "What the hell are you talking about?" Damon leaned back against the cold wall, his tone matter-of-fact. "You didn't search me very well, did you? While you were playing tough guys, you didn't realize I've been recording this whole thing. Cameras, mics, everything." For a moment, the room fell silent. Paul's expression froze, his face turning red as realization began to creep in. "What did you just say?" Damon's eyes stayed locked on his. "I said everything you did today, every shove, every insult, every lie, is on tape, and it's already been sent to someone else." Daniel straightened, his smirk vanishing. "What do you mean, sent?" Damon's voice sharpened. "While you were too busy trying to frame me, the footage was being uploaded to a secure drive. My friends got it. And if I don't check in soon, it's going online." Paul's face contorted with fury, his voice rising. "You're lying. You're bluffing." Damon shrugged, completely unfazed. "Go ahead. Keep thinking that." Daniel looked at Paul, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through. "Paul, what if—" "Shut up!" Paul snapped, his voice cracking with anger as he turned back to Damon. "You're bluffing. There's no damn footage." Damon stared back at him, unblinking. "You want to take that chance? Go ahead, but I'll bet by now my friend's already watching it. getting ready to post it. Paul's breathing grew louder, his hands shaking slightly as he grabbed at the bars of the cell, leaning in. "You think this is a joke? You think you can threaten us?" "I'm not threatening you," Damon replied coolly. "You already did this to yourselves." Daniel stepped forward now, his composure cracking. "If that's true, it is," Damon said, cutting him off. "And you're out of time. Every second you stand there, you're giving them more to see." Paul's face turned crimson, his rage palpable. "You little—" He slammed a fist against the bars, the sound echoing through the room. "You think this changes anything? You think anyone's going to care about your video? You're nothing. Nothing!" Damon's voice dropped to a low, deadly calm. "We'll see who's nothing when they see the truth. When everyone sees what you did to me." "To Marcus." Paul froze, his jaw twitching as Daniel looked at him uneasily. "Marcus?" Damon nodded, his gaze unwavering. "That's right. You remember him, don't you? You ruined his life. And now everyone's going to know what you did. What you've been doing for years." Paul stepped back, his chest heaving as he stared at Damon like a man who had lost control. He turned to Daniel, his voice sharp and panicked. "We need to fix this." "There's nothing you can fix," Damon said, leaning back against the wall with a satisfied calm. "It's over." The two officers stood frozen, the weight of his words settling over them like a storm cloud. Damon watched them carefully, his expression unwavering. This was for Marcus. And now the clock was ticking. The air in the holding cell was charged, thick with tension that had nowhere to go. Damon sat quietly on the cold bench, watching the two officers unravel through the steel bars. Their cocky arrogance was gone now, replaced with something closer to desperation. Paul paced frantically across the station's hallway, his boots thudding loudly against the tile floor. "He's bluffing," Paul muttered to himself, his voice strained, though it was clear he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "He's not bluffing, Paul," Daniel hissed, his face pale and his voice tight. He was standing at the desk phone, his hand gripping the receiver so hard it trembled. "If that video's out there, it's gonna go everywhere. It's not just us. It's the whole damn department." "Shut up!" Paul snapped, spinning to face him. "We can control this. We'll get his phone, delete the footage, and what?" Damon's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Calm but icy. "Destroy my phone? Break my car? You really think it's just there? I told you. My friend already has the footage, and by now, I'm guessing you're starting to get calls." As if on cue, the front desk officer's phone started to ring. A single shrill tone that made Paul freeze in place. Daniel turned his head slowly, dread crawling over his face as he stared at the phone like it was a snake ready to bite. Paul's face turned crimson, veins bulging at his temples. "Ignore it," he growled. Though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried all afternoon, the ringing stopped for a moment, then started again. Louder, more insistent this time. Daniel cursed under his breath and backed away toward the far corner of the room. Damon leaned back against the wall of his cell, his lips curling into a faint smile. "That's your problem now." Paul stormed to the desk and grabbed the phone, his voice sharp as he barked into the receiver. "Right." He listened for a beat, his face paling as whoever was on the other end spoke. No, that's not." He paused, jaw twitching, the color draining from his face. "Where did you—" He slammed the phone down with a loud bang, the sound echoing through the nearly empty station. Paul's breathing was heavy, uneven, his shoulders heaving as he turned slowly to face Damon. "You did this," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Damon didn't answer. He didn't need to. The tension in the room was all the confirmation he needed that the footage was already spreading like wildfire. "Paul!" Daniel's voice wavered, panic rising. "They're saying it's already on Twitter. Someone's tagging the chief. They're asking for statements." Paul turned toward Daniel, his face red with fury. "Shut up and figure out how to stop it." Daniel fumbled for his phone, pulling it from his pocket with shaking hands, his thumb swiping rapidly as he scrolled through notifications. The glow of the screen illuminated his wide-eyed panic. "Oh, no. No, Paul. This is bad. It's everywhere." Paul looked ready to explode, but before he could move, the front door of the station swung open with a heavy thud. "Excuse me." All heads turned as a tall man in a sharp navy suit strode into the room, a leather briefcase in hand and a determined expression on his face. "Damon's lawyer." "Who the hell are you?" Paul barked, his voice cracking as he tried to sound authoritative. The man didn't so much as blink. "I'm Mr. Langston, Mr. Wright. I'm Damon Taylor's attorney. I've been sent here to secure my client's immediate release." Paul scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "He's being processed. He's not going anywhere." Mr. Langston stopped, his gaze cold and unflinching as he looked between Paul and Daniel. "I think you'll reconsider," he said evenly. "I'm sure you're both aware that my client's footage of this unlawful stop and subsequent assault is currently trending online. And since I'm certain you don't want to add wrongful imprisonment to your already impressive list of violations, you're going to let Mr. Taylor out. Now." Daniel froze. "Trending?" he said. "Shut up, Daniel," Paul roared, his voice breaking with panic. Mr. Langston turned to the front desk officer, who had been watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. "Open the cell," he said curtly. The officer hesitated for a moment, glancing between Paul and Mr. Langston, before slowly reaching for the keys. Paul's face contorted with fury, but there was nothing he could do. He was losing control. The keys rattled as the officer unlocked the cell door and swung it open with a creak. Damon stood up slowly, his calm composure unshaken as he stepped out, rolling his shoulders to shake off the tension. Paul stepped forward, his voice raw. "You're not walking out of here clean. You hear me? This isn't over." Damon turned to face him, his gaze cold and unwavering. "You're right. It's not over. Not for you." Mr. Langston gestured for Damon to follow, and together they walked toward the front door. As they passed Daniel, the younger officer stood frozen, his phone still glowing in his hand. Damon caught a glimpse of the footage playing, Paul's face twisted with anger, his voice loud and unmistakable. Paul's voice boomed behind them one last time, desperate and furious. "You think you've won? You're gonna regret this." Damon stopped just before the door, turning back slightly. "No, Paul, I think you're the one who's gonna regret it." With that, Damon stepped outside into the afternoon light, the door closing behind him with a sharp, final clang. The cool afternoon air felt sharp against Damon's skin as he stepped outside the police station, his lawyer, Mr. Langston, walking briskly beside him. The parking lot was quiet, save for the hum of distant traffic and the faint thud of a closing car door. For the first time in hours, Damon felt the weight in his chest begin to lift. "Are you all right?" Langston asked as he glanced at Damon, his tone calm but serious. Damon rolled his shoulders, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had left faint red marks. "I'll be fine." His voice was steady, but his mind was racing. The last few hours playing on a loop, the taunts, the shoves, the planted evidence. He stopped just short of the parking lot's edge, turning back to look at the squat gray station. Through the wide glass doors, he could still see a glimpse of chaos unfolding inside. Paul and Daniel arguing with the front desk officer, their motions frantic, their faces contorted with anger and panic. Langston followed Damon's gaze. "They're done," he said firmly. "The footage has already spread too far. You did exactly what you needed to do." Damon exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping just a fraction. "It's not enough yet." Langston tilted his head, studying him. "It's enough for today. Let the system do its work now." Damon turned to face him, his jaw tightening. "The system?" He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "The system is what put my brother in prison because of them. Marcus never got a chance to let the system work." Langston's expression softened, though his tone remained even. "This time, it's different. You made sure of that. The department's under a microscope now. I guarantee you those two officers are scrambling to protect themselves, but it's too late. Internal affairs is going to eat them alive." Damon looked away, staring at the horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent. The orange glow stretched long across the lot, painting everything in stark, unforgiving light. "You saw Marcus, right?" Damon's voice was low now, filled with quiet pain. He sat in a cell for 2 years. 2 years because of their lies. My mom had to mortgage her house just to fight it. And they still won. Langston placed a hand on Damon's shoulder, grounding him. And now they've exposed themselves. This time, they won't win. Damon nodded slightly, his eyes narrowing as he looked back toward the station. They thought they were untouchable, that no one would believe me, just like Marcus. But now, everyone sees them for what they are. Langston checked his watch, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. Your friend sent me a message right before I walked in. The footage has hit all the major platforms. News outlets are picking it up, and people are sharing it everywhere. That video speaks for itself, Damon. There's no covering it up. Damon's lips curled into the faintest smile. Good. The faint creak of the station's doors drew their attention. Paul stormed outside, his face a deep red, his fists clenched at his sides. Daniel followed close behind, his earlier confidence replaced with wide-eyed panic as he glanced nervously around the lot. Hey! Paul's voice boomed across the parking lot as he stomped toward Damon. You think this is over? You think some stupid video is going to change anything? Langston stepped forward immediately, blocking Paul's path. You don't speak to my client, he said sharply, his voice cutting like glass. Not another word. Paul ignored him, his glare fixed on Damon like a laser. You think you're a hero? You think people are going to side with you? You're just another— Don't, Damon said, his voice cutting through Paul's tirade like a blade. His calm, unwavering tone made Paul falter mid-sentence. You don't get to talk anymore. Paul froze, his fists still shaking, but he didn't speak again. Daniel lingered a few paces behind him, his gaze darting nervously to the station doors, as if he was expecting someone to come for them. Damon stepped forward, just enough to close the distance without breaking his composure. Your time is up, Paul. You and your little partner here, you've been doing this for years. How many people did you lie about? How many lives did you ruin because you thought no one would call you out? You, Paul started, but his voice wavered. Damon didn't let him finish. This isn't just about me or Marcus. It's about every single person you did this to and got away with it. But you didn't get away this time. Paul's chest rose and fell, his breathing loud and ragged, but he said nothing. Daniel stood frozen in place, his face pale. Langston stepped in again, his voice clipped and sharp. You should get back inside. I'm sure your department will have plenty of questions for you. You might want to start preparing your answers. Paul's glare darted from Langston back to Damon. He opened his mouth like he was about to argue, but no words came. With a frustrated growl, he turned and stomped back toward the station, shoving past Daniel. Daniel followed a moment later, his head down, his steps slow and hesitant. Damon watched them go, his expression blank, but his resolve unshaken. The weight of what had just happened settled on him like a heavy stone, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. Langston adjusted his tie and turned to Damon. Come on, let's get out of here. You've done enough for today. Damon followed his lawyer across the lot, the last rays of sunlight casting long shadows behind him. His phone buzzed faintly in his pocket as another notification came through, but he didn't need to look at it. He already knew what it would say. The world had seen the truth, and this time, the truth would win. The glow of Damon's phone lit up as he sat across the table in his lawyer's office. The room was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the police station. Screens mounted on the walls played news broadcasts on mute, every major channel cycling through the same headline. Shocking police misconduct caught on camera. Officers under investigation. The footage played in loops, Paul's face contorted with rage, the officers' voices echoing the slurs and threats Damon had endured. Across the bottom of the screen, comments from social media scrolled, relentless in their condemnation. How many others have they done this to? Hold them accountable. Justice for Damon and his brother Marcus. Mr. Langston's voice broke the silence as he placed a file on the table. Internal Affairs called an hour ago. Both officers have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. It's moving faster than I expected. Damon nodded slightly, his expression calm but distant. They're scared. Scared doesn't even begin to cover it. Langston sat down across from Damon, opening the file and sliding a few printed screenshots toward him. The footage has reached over 10 million views in less than 24 hours. News outlets are already contacting victims who claim they've been harassed or falsely accused by Wright and Moore. It's not just about you anymore, Damon. Damon stared at the screenshots, his hands tightening into fists. Names and photos scrolled across the papers. Other victims, people who had been targeted and silenced by Paul and Daniel. People like Marcus. I knew it wasn't just us, Damon murmured, his voice low but firm. They've been doing this for years. How many lives have they ruined? Langston leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. Enough to bury them for good. Once Internal Affairs finishes their investigation, this case could expose the department's entire handling of misconduct. But you'll need to decide how far you want to take this. Damon looked up at him sharply. What do you mean? Langston adjusted his tie. The department is going to want to settle this quickly and quietly. They'll offer you compensation, and they'll throw Wright and Moore to the wolves to protect their own reputation. But that won't fix the bigger problem. And you know it. Damon's jaw tightened. His thoughts drifted to Marcus again. How he had sat in a prison cell for a crime he didn't commit. How he had been treated like less than nothing, because no one questioned Paul's lies. It's not just about them, Damon said firmly, his voice carrying a quiet fire. It's about the system that let them get away with it. If I take their money and walk away, nothing changes. Someone else will take their place. Langston smiled faintly, a flicker of pride in his expression. I thought you'd say that. The lawyer slid another document across the table. I've already started compiling names of other victims who've reached out. We can push for more than just their firing. We can demand a full investigation into every case they've been involved in. Expose the whole thing. Damon took the document, flipping through the names slowly. He recognized some of them. Stories he'd heard in passing, whispered among neighbors, or buried in forgotten news clippings. Stories that no one believed until now. Do it, Damon said, his voice clear and resolute. Whatever it takes. They don't get to bury this. Before Langston could respond, Damon's phone buzzed loudly on the table. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was a call from an unknown number. Take it, Langston said. It could be someone worth hearing. Damon answered, pressing the phone to his ear. Hello? There was a pause. Then a familiar voice came through. Low, quiet, and angry. You think this is over? Damon froze. It was Paul. Langston watched him carefully, his face tightening as he recognized Damon's sudden change in expression. You set me up, Paul's voice hissed through the line. You think you're some kind of hero? You don't know what you've started. Damon stayed silent, his fingers curling around the phone as Paul continued, his tone venomous and seething. You're gonna regret this. You and your brother. You think people care about you? They don't. You're nothing. And Damon cut him off, his voice cold and unshaken. You're done, Paul. You can't threaten me anymore. The world knows who you are now. Paul's heavy breathing carried through the line, each exhale sharp and angry. Damon could hear the desperation underneath it all. The realization that Paul was no longer in control. Your badge doesn't protect you anymore, Damon added, and neither does your silence. He ended the call and set the phone down on the table. Langston watched him carefully. That was him, wasn't it? Damon nodded. Yeah, he's scared. And he should be. Langston gestured toward the TV screen on the wall, where another anchor spoke with a victim of misconduct. It's too late for him to backtrack now. He's unraveling. And the more he fights, the worse it'll be. Damon leaned back in his chair, his gaze hard and determined. Good. Let him unravel. People like him only learn when they have something to lose. Langston tapped his pen against the table. The department will contact us soon. When they do, we'll push harder. But you've started something here, Damon. A lot of people are counting on you now. Damon met his gaze, his voice steady. I'm not stopping. Not until they're held accountable for everything they've done. Langston nodded approvingly. Then we'll keep pushing. For Marcus. For everyone. Damon exhaled, his gaze flicking back to the news screen as images of Paul and Daniel flashed alongside headlines. The world was watching now, and for the first time, Damon knew they couldn't look away. For Paul Wright and Daniel Moore, the walls were closing in. Paul sat alone in his kitchen, his phone buzzing incessantly on the table. Missed calls, messages, and news notifications filled the screen. He didn't bother answering anymore. Outside, protest chants echoed faintly from somewhere down the block, growing louder each day. He gripped the edge of the table with white knuckles, staring blankly at the flickering TV. Today, Officer Paul Wright and Officer Daniel Moore were officially suspended without pay, pending a formal investigation. Protests are expected to escalate. Paul slammed his fist against the table. Lies, he growled under his breath. All of it. He barely flinched when the phone buzzed again, this time showing a familiar name. Daniel Moore. Paul hesitated, his breathing uneven before answering. What? Paul, we're screwed. Daniel's voice hissed through the phone, frantic and panicked. Do you see what they're saying about us? Internal Affairs just called me. They're talking charges, man. Charges! Paul clenched his jaw, his voice low and venomous. Calm down. This isn't over. They've got nothing but a damn video. It's enough, Daniel shot back. They're digging into everything now. Every arrest, every report, everything. We can't hide it anymore. Paul ran a hand through his hair, sweat glistening on his forehead. We'll figure this out. The union will back us up. The union's distancing themselves. Daniel snapped, his voice cracking. Do you get it now? We're on our own. You and me. Paul opened his mouth to respond, but Daniel hung up abruptly, leaving only the dial tone. He tossed the phone aside with a growl, his mind racing. For the first time, Paul felt it. Real fear. At the police department, Daniel sat slumped in a chair across from two grim-faced internal affairs investigators. The interrogation room was small, and the air felt stifling. Sweat dripped down the back of Daniel's neck as one investigator slid a stack of printed photos across the table. Stills pulled directly from Damon's footage. We have you on video, the investigator said, his tone calm but relentless. Planting evidence. Harassing Mr. Taylor. Violating protocol. That alone could cost you your badge. But now we're reopening dozens of cases you worked with Wright. Daniel's voice trembled as he tried to speak. That wasn't... Save it. The second investigator cut in sharply, flipping through files. This stops today, Moore. You either cooperate with us now, or you'll go down harder than Wright. It's your choice. Daniel slumped lower, his face pale as the weight of the consequences pressed down on him. I was just following orders, he muttered weakly, knowing it wasn't enough to save him. Meanwhile, Damon sat in his lawyer's office, his phone lighting up with notifications. Protests had begun outside the police department, people holding signs with slogans like Justice for Marcus Taylor and Hold Wright and Moore accountable. Videos flooded social media, crowds chanting, news anchors analyzing the scandal, and officials scrambling to respond. Mr. Langston sat across from Damon, flipping through a thick legal document. It's happening, Damon, he said. Both officers are facing criminal charges, misconduct, falsifying evidence, assault. Paul Wright is refusing to cooperate, but Moore's already cracking. He's trying to shift the blame. Damon leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. They deserve everything that's coming to them. Langston nodded. The DA's office is preparing their case now. This is bigger than just the video. We've uncovered evidence that Wright and Moore have been falsifying arrests for years. Your footage opened the door. Damon looked out the window, where the faint glow of police lights flickered against the evening sky. It's not enough yet. Langston raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? This is a massive win, Damon. You've exposed them. Damon turned back, his voice cold and measured. I want them to feel what Marcus felt. Powerless. Alone, like their whole world is collapsing. Langston nodded slowly. They're feeling it already. Paul Wright's name is ruined. His neighbors are protesting outside his house. Daniel Moore's family has been getting threats. They'll both lose their badges. And their freedom, if we're lucky. Damon exhaled, his shoulders dropping slightly. Good. Langston stood, gathering his papers. The trial's coming. Be ready. You're going to have to testify against them, and it won't be easy. They'll try to smear you, just like they did to Marcus. Damon's gaze sharpened. Let them try. This time, they don't control the story. I do. Back at Paul Wright's house, the glow of his TV flickered against the darkened living room as he watched a news anchor read a statement. Officer Wright and Officer Moore are expected to face formal charges later this week. The footage released by Damon Taylor has sparked widespread protests and demands for police accountability across the state. Paul slumped in his chair, his hands trembling as the screen flashed his name next to words like misconduct and corruption. From outside, faint chants carried through the night air. Justice for Marcus! Hold Wright accountable! The sound grew louder, rattling the windows like a rising storm. Paul closed his eyes, his breathing ragged. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, there was no way out. The days after the footage's release felt like a whirlwind. For Damon, it was both a victory and the beginning of something much larger. Paul Wright and Daniel Moore were suspended pending investigation, but that wasn't enough. Not yet. Damon stood outside Mr. Langston's office, watching as reporters lined the sidewalks, cameras clicking and microphones aimed at anyone who walked past. He ignored them, pushing through the glass doors and into the cool, quiet lobby. Inside, Langston was waiting, his desk covered in folders, documents, and a laptop streaming another press conference. He looked up as Damon entered. You're just in time. For what? Damon asked, his tone even but curious. Langston turned the laptop toward him. On screen, the district attorney stood at a podium surrounded by reporters. Her voice carried a firm resolve. We are pursuing full criminal charges against officers Paul Wright and Daniel Moore, including falsifying evidence, harassment, and excessive use of force. This case is emblematic of a larger issue, and we are committed to seeking justice for all victims affected by their misconduct. Damon exhaled slowly, letting the words sink in. It's happening. Langston nodded, his eyes sharp. The DA's office is all in. They're not just going after Wright and Moore for what they did to you. They're reopening dozens of their old cases. The department's scrambling, but it's too late. Damon pulled up a chair, glancing at the thick stack of files on the desk. What about the other victims? Langston pushed a file toward him and flipped it open. Inside were names, photos, and sworn statements. More people have come forward. People who were too scared to speak before. The footage gave them courage. Some of these cases go back over 5 years. It's ugly, Damon. They covered a lot up. Damon's jaw tightened as he scanned the pages. Stories of planted evidence, harassment, and ruined lives stared back at him. People just like Marcus. This is what they've been doing. Damon murmured, his voice hard. For years. Langston leaned forward, his tone serious. That's why we need you ready. You're going to be the key witness. Your footage is the cornerstone of the case, but your testimony will tie it all together. Damon looked up at him, his gaze steady. I'll be ready. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Langston's office became ground zero for the case. Investigators from the DA's office arrived daily, armed with stacks of reports and videos from other victims. Damon sat through hours of interviews, reliving the encounter frame by frame, making sure there were no gaps in his story. One afternoon, as Damon reviewed his sworn statement, Langston entered with a grim expression. We have more. Damon looked up sharply. What do you mean? Daniel Moore is cooperating, Langston said, sliding a folder onto the table. He's turned on Paul. He's claiming Paul planted the bag, orchestrated everything, and that he was just following orders. Damon's lip curled in disgust. Of course he is. Langston shrugged. It doesn't absolve him. He's guilty, and he knows it. But his cooperation strengthens the case against Wright. He's providing details about other incidents, too. Incidents where evidence was falsified, where people were targeted for no reason other than convenience or spite. Damon shook his head. They thought they'd get away with it forever. Wright still isn't talking, Langston added. He's denying everything. Claims the footage is taken out of context. Damon barked out a bitter laugh. Context? What context justifies planting evidence and threatening someone? Langston sighed. He's digging in. That arrogance is the only thing he has left. But it won't save him in court. Damon nodded slowly. Good. I want him to watch this all fall apart. I want him to see it through to the end. The night before the trial, Damon sat alone at his kitchen table. The hum of his refrigerator was the only sound in the quiet apartment. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. It was a message from his mother. Your brother would be so proud of you. I love you, Damon. Damon's throat tightened as he stared at the words. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath as the memories of Marcus came flooding back. You're gonna fix this, little brother, Marcus had said years ago, his voice hoarse from his time in that cold prison cell. You're gonna make it right. Tomorrow was for him. Tomorrow was for every person Paul and Daniel had crushed under their boots. His phone buzzed again, this time a message from his friend who had helped upload the footage. We'll be watching. You've got this. Damon set the phone down, his resolve hardening. Tomorrow, Paul Wright and Daniel Moore would finally face the consequences of their actions. Tomorrow, the system that had ignored Marcus would be forced to listen. He stood and walked to the window, staring out into the quiet night. The city stretched before him, its lights flickering like distant stars. Somewhere out there, people were waiting to see if justice could still mean something. For Damon, it wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about Marcus, about every name in those files. Tomorrow, the truth would be heard. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Spectators filled the benches, their eyes trained on the front of the room, where two tables sat facing the judge's imposing bench. At one table, Damon sat with Mr. Langston and the district attorney, their presence calm and composed. Across from them, Paul Wright and Daniel Moore sat with their defense attorneys. Paul's usual confidence had been replaced with a simmering tension, his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for an escape. Daniel sat slouched beside him, his expression hollow, sweat beading on his forehead. All rise, the bailiff announced, and the crowd shuffled to their feet as the judge entered, her gavel striking the wooden block with authority. Court is now in session, she declared. The state versus Paul Wright and Daniel Moore. You may be seated. The hum of whispers faded as the district attorney rose, stepping to the center of the room. Her voice was measured and deliberate. Your Honor, members of the jury, today we will present clear and undeniable evidence of the defendant's abuse of power, their falsification of evidence, and their systemic harassment of citizens, including Mr. Damon Taylor. This case isn't just about one incident. It's about a pattern of corruption that has hurt countless people. She gestured toward Damon, her tone sharpening. Mr. Taylor's bravery in recording his encounter with these officers and coming forward has brought these injustices to light. Today, the truth will finally be heard. The first day of testimony was grueling. The prosecution presented hours of footage. Damon's video played on a large screen for the jury to see. Paul's snarling face filled the room as his voice rang out. The racial slurs, threats, and planted evidence undeniable. Damon watched the jury carefully. Their faces ranged from stunned to furious as they absorbed the footage. Some glanced toward Paul and Daniel with thinly veiled disgust. Langston leaned over and whispered, "It's landing exactly how it needs to." When Damon took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. He adjusted the microphone in front of him, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. The district attorney began her questioning, her tone firm but supportive. "Mr. Taylor, can you walk us through what happened on the day of your arrest?" Damon nodded, his voice steady. "I was driving home when Officers Wright and Moore pulled me over. They claimed I had a broken taillight, but my car was in perfect condition. They ordered me out of the vehicle and began searching it without my consent." The DA prompted him further. "At any point, did they inform you of your rights or provide a valid reason for the search?" "No," Damon said firmly. Instead, they planted a bag of drugs in my car and tried to use it to arrest me. The DA stepped closer, her voice rising slightly. And how do you know the evidence was planted? Damon glanced toward the defense table before returning his gaze to the jury. Because I installed cameras in my car after my brother was falsely arrested by the same officers. The cameras recorded everything. You've all seen the footage. The prosecution played another clip, Paul aggressively shoving Damon against the car, his voice filled with venom as he planted the bag. Damon watched as the jury's expressions hardened further. When the defense had their turn, they leaned into their strategy of deflection. Paul's attorney stood, adjusting his tie as he approached Damon. Mr. Taylor, wouldn't you agree that police officers have a difficult and dangerous job? Damon's expression didn't waver. A difficult job doesn't give anyone the right to lie or ruin lives. The attorney's tone grew sharper. You're upset about what happened to your brother, aren't you? Couldn't it be argued that you were targeting these officers out of a personal vendetta? Damon sat up straighter, his voice calm but firm. What happened to my brother is why I installed the cameras, yes. But I didn't force these officers to lie, to plant evidence, or to threaten me. They made those choices. The defense attorney faltered slightly before stepping back. No further questions. By the third day, Daniel Moore was called to the stand as part of a plea deal. His betrayal of Paul sent ripples through the courtroom. Daniel's hands shook as he gripped the stand, avoiding eye contact with Paul. It was his idea, Daniel said, his voice trembling. Paul always led these stops. He'd say we needed to keep people like Damon in their place. I went along with it because I was afraid of what he'd do if I didn't. Paul glared at Daniel, his face twisting in rage. You lying coward, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for the judge to gavel sharply. Mr. Right, the judge barked. One more outburst, and you'll be removed from this courtroom. Daniel's testimony was damning. He detailed how Paul had orchestrated arrests, falsified reports, and targeted people they thought wouldn't fight back. His words painted a picture of systemic corruption that went beyond just the two of them. When the prosecution rested, the courtroom was tense. The defense scrambled to salvage what they could, but the evidence was overwhelming. Langston leaned toward Damon. This is it. They've got nothing left. Damon nodded, his expression unreadable. He glanced at Paul, who sat rigid, his face pale and hands clenched into fists. The judge adjourned for the day, setting up the final arguments for the next morning. As Damon left the courtroom, surrounded by reporters shouting questions, he felt a quiet resolve. The truth had been laid bare. Now, it was time for justice. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that carried weight, like the whole world was holding its breath. Damon sat with Langston at the prosecution's table, his hands folded tightly as the judge re-entered the room and took her seat. All rise, the bailiff announced, and the entire room stood as one. The judge's gavel struck once, her voice calm but firm. Be seated. Damon's eyes flickered briefly toward the jury box. 12 people sat stiffly, their expressions unreadable, but the weight of the past days was etched into their faces. He exhaled slowly as the judge turned toward the defense table, where Paul Wright sat with his attorney. The former officer's face was pale, his once cocky confidence replaced by a quiet rage. Daniel Moore sat beside him, his shoulders slumped, unable to look at anyone. The judge began, her voice carrying authority that cut through the heavy room. Before I proceed to the verdict and sentencing, let me make something very clear. This court has reviewed overwhelming evidence of misconduct, abuse of power, and the falsification of arrests by both defendants, Paul Wright and Daniel Moore. What this case reveals is not only the grave actions of two individuals, but also the systemic failures that allowed them to thrive. Paul's jaw twitched, his fists clenching against the table, but he said nothing. The judge continued, turning to face the jury. Jury foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? A middle-aged woman stood, her hands steady as she held the paper. We have, Your Honor. please read the verdict." The woman nodded, glancing briefly toward Paul and Daniel before reading. "On the charges of falsifying evidence, the jury finds the defendants guilty. On the charges of harassment and excessive force, the jury finds the defendants guilty. On the charges of obstruction of justice, the jury finds the defendants guilty." The words struck like a thunderclap. Damon sat still, a quiet sense of justice flooding his chest as murmurs rippled through the gallery. Paul's attorney whispered something sharply to him, but Paul didn't respond. His face was blank, though the rage in his eyes burned bright. The judge's gavel silenced the murmurs. "Order." She turned to face the defendants. "Paul Wright, Daniel Moore, please stand." Both men rose slowly. Daniel's head bowed while Paul stared defiantly ahead. The judge's voice was resolute. "For your crimes, this court sentences you as follows. Paul Wright, for your role as the orchestrator of these offenses, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. You abused your authority, violated the trust placed in you, and destroyed countless lives with deliberate malice. Daniel Moore, for your participation and complicity in these crimes, and in light of your cooperation, you are sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Your cooperation does not absolve you, but is reflected in your reduced sentence." Gasps echoed through the gallery, but the judge wasn't finished. She turned her gaze toward the courtroom at large, as if speaking to everyone, not just those present, but to the world beyond. "Furthermore, I am ordering that all cases connected to these two defendants be reopened and re-examined immediately. For every individual who was wronged by their misconduct, this court will ensure justice is restored." Damon inhaled sharply, his mind flashing to Marcus. "It's happening." The judge struck the gavel once more. Court is adjourned. As the room erupted into noise, reporters whispering, people crying, families hugging one another, Damon sat frozen, absorbing it all. Langston placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's done, Damon. You did it." Damon nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "It's not just for me. It's for Marcus. For everyone they hurt." Across the room, Damon's gaze locked on Paul, who was being handcuffed by court officers. Paul shot him a glare, venomous and unrepentant. But Damon didn't flinch. Paul's words earlier, his threats, meant nothing now. He was done. Daniel, on the other hand, looked like a broken man, his head low as he muttered something to his attorney. Damon didn't feel pity for either of them. This was justice. Finally. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing as Damon and Langston emerged from the building. The chants of the crowd filled the air. "Justice for Marcus! Hold them all accountable." Damon stopped at the courthouse steps, raising his hand to silence the crowd. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying over the sea of people. "This isn't just about me. It's about my brother, Marcus, and every single person who's ever been silenced. People who were told they didn't matter. Today proves that they do." The crowd erupted into cheers, but Damon wasn't done. "We can't stop here. The system that let this happen still exists. But today, we've taken the first step in breaking it down. This is just the beginning." Langston stepped forward, guiding Damon away as the chants grew louder, the energy electric. As they moved through the crowd, a familiar face appeared. Damon's mother, tears streaming down her cheeks as she wrapped him in a hug. "Marcus would be so proud," she whispered. Damon closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the day finally settling. "We did it, Mom." She pulled back, her hands on his shoulders. "No, Damon, you did it." That night, as Damon sat alone on his balcony, the city stretched out beneath him, its lights flickering against the dark sky. His phone buzzed with messages, victims thanking him, people sharing stories, news updates reporting the fallout. He glanced at a photo of Marcus on the table beside him, his brother's smile frozen in time. For the first time in years, Damon felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, but the truth had been heard. Justice had finally come. Months later, the world felt lighter. The storm had passed, leaving behind something Damon hadn't felt in years: hope. The footage, The trial and the fallout had sparked a reckoning that reached far beyond him. Paul Wright and Daniel Moore were serving their sentences, their badges gone and their reputations in tatters. Justice had come for them, but the fight had always been for Marcus. Damon sat in the courthouse waiting room, tapping his fingers lightly against his knee. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, illuminating the room in a calm glow. Nearby, his mother sat beside him, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, though she hadn't taken a sip. "You think he'll come out soon?" she asked quietly, glancing toward the double doors leading to the courtroom. Damon nodded, his voice steady. "They said the judge is finalizing everything. It's just a formality now." His mother's lips quivered into the smallest smile as she whispered, "Finally." Before Damon could respond, the doors swung open. Langston appeared first, his professional demeanor intact, but the faint smile on his face gave it all away. And then came Marcus. He stepped into the waiting room, his tall frame straight and strong. Dressed sharply in clean clothes, Marcus looked different than Damon remembered. Lighter somehow, as though the weight of 2 years had finally been lifted from his shoulders. Their mother gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hands as tears spilled down her cheeks. Marcus crossed the room in a few strides and pulled her into a hug, holding her tight as though making up for every second they'd lost. "I'm home, Mama," Marcus whispered. "It's over." Damon watched them for a moment, his throat tightening. He stood as Marcus turned, meeting his brother's gaze. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus smiled. A smile Damon hadn't seen in years. "You did it," Marcus said, his voice rough but full of warmth. "You actually did it." Damon stepped forward and pulled his brother into a hug, his voice quiet. "We did it. You're free." Marcus gripped Damon's shoulder tightly, his voice lowering. "They're gonna fix it, right? The people they hurt?" Damon nodded. "The judge said all their cases are being reopened. People are getting second chances because of you." Marcus stepped back, shaking his head slowly, as if still trying to process it all. "I don't know how you did it, man. After what they put me through, I thought they'd win forever." Damon's jaw tightened. They almost did, but this time, they lost. Later that afternoon, they stood together on the courthouse steps. The air was crisp, the sun high in the sky as reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. Marcus stood at the center, Damon and Langston on either side of him. Marcus cleared his throat as the cameras clicked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "My name is Marcus Taylor. 2 years ago, I was wrongfully arrested and convicted because of Paul Wright and Daniel Moore. I spent 2 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit because no one believed me." He paused, glancing at Damon with a faint smile. "But my brother never gave up. Damon fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Because of him, and because of the truth, my name is clear." The crowd grew quiet as Marcus continued. "What happened to me isn't rare. There are so many people who've been silenced, ignored, and forgotten. But this proves that the truth matters. It proves that justice is possible." Damon stepped forward, adding to his brother's words. "This fight wasn't just for Marcus. It was for everyone who's been wronged. The people who were told their voices didn't matter. Paul Wright and Daniel Moore thought they were untouchable, but they were wrong. No one is above accountability." The crowd erupted into cheers, reporters shouting questions as Damon and Marcus stepped back. Their mother joined them, slipping an arm around both her sons as they made their way down the steps together. That evening, the three of them sat around the dining room table in their childhood home. The scent of home-cooked food filled the air, something they hadn't shared as a family in years. Marcus leaned back in his chair, laughing as their mother piled more food onto his plate. "I swear, Mama, you're trying to fatten me up," Marcus teased, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "You're too skinny, boy," she said, brushing away a tear as she laughed. Damon watched them both, a quiet warmth settling over him. The years they'd lost couldn't be replaced, but they had this moment, and so many more to come. Marcus turned to Damon suddenly, his expression serious. "You know they'll keep fighting, right? People like Wright, they'll always try to find a way to win." Damon nodded, his gaze steady. Let them try. They won't win this time. We know how to fight back now. Marcus held out a fist, and Damon bumped it with his own. A silent promise between brothers. Their mother smiled through her tears, shaking her head. You boys are something else. Marcus grinned. You raised us right, Mama. Damon leaned back in his chair, letting the sounds of laughter and clinking dishes wash over him. Outside, the world was still flawed, still fighting its battles. But for now, this moment was theirs. Marcus was free. The truth had won. And for Damon, that was enough.